Welcome to Podcasting Smarter, the podcast for podcasters by podcasters. Podcasting Smarter is the official podcast from Podbean, featuring podcasting interviews, best practices, and helpful tips. We're here to give you the tools, resources, product updates, and news to help you get started podcasting and keep your podcast growing.
Hello and welcome to Podcasting Smarter. This is Norma Belenky, Podbean's head of events. And in today's episode, we're having a conversation with Podbean's Senior Vice President of Advertising, Kerry Tracy, on breaking down and understanding podcast statistics. Hello and welcome, Kerry.
Hey, Norma Jean.
So excited to have you here today. And, podcast advertising is on the rise. We talk about it a lot here at Podbean. We have a lot of tools, incredible technical tools for advertising. But the statistics can be kind of intimidating. So I'm really excited to chat with you today and break down what some of these things mean and how podcasters and businesses can take advantage.
Absolutely.
So just to jump in, first off, there's a lot of statistics out there that are showing that podcast revenue has grown. Can you talk a little bit about, that trend of how much podcast advertising overall is growing and how businesses and podcasters both can take advantage?
Yeah, no, it's the growth of podcasting for a relatively new medium is incredible. It's growing at a faster rate than the internet was when that first came about. But, in terms of numbers, and again, you take them somewhat with a grain of salt, I think you alluded to earlier, but they're not always going to be exact, but ballpark 2019, it was about 708 million total revenue. To 2021, it, went up to $1 billion. In 2022, $2 billion. In 2024, they anticipate to be at $4 billion. So that is just incredible growth. It doesn't look as if it's slowing down. If anything, that percentage may increase.
Yeah, wild. I mean, it feels like a really exciting time to be in podcasting, number one. And it's really a great moment to take advantage of podcast advertising. So we've got a lot of resources and tips here at Podbean. We've got some links here in the show notes. And today we're going to talk about statistics. So first off, can you explain a couple of ad delivery methods? Because, there's a lot of terms people are throwing around, baked in, dynamically inserted ads. And there's also statistics on these as well. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the typical ad delivery for podcasts are baked-in ads, host-read ads, and dynamically inserted ads. Baked-in ads were kind of the original, and they are they call it baked-in because it's baked into the content. And, they're intertwined throughout. The host will typically refer to that product. And when it first started, it was more of a kind of a sponsorship than an actual ad because they were, throughout the show. But you couldn't carve those ads out. That ad is in there forever. And so what advertisers started asking is that, hey, is there a way that you can, provide an ad as other mediums where you can, run a campaign during Halloween, and that same ad isn't going to pop up during, the Christmas holidays. And so that's where, dynamically inserted came into play, where, that you have the ability to drop that ad in and it can run in your current podcast episode, all your backlog episodes, and then, in your future episodes during that time frame in the campaign. So you can say, I'm going to run this campaign for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever the case may be. And you also have the ability to change that creative throughout that. And that's the power and the beauty of dynamically inserted. The other one, which we won't really get too heavily into tonight or today, is the programmatic, which is another, where you partner with DSPs. But as far as some statistics, when comparing, dynamically inserted ads to baked-in ads, stats have reflected a strong push towards dynamically inserted ads. And the reason for that, again, is because advertisers have the ability to change that creative and or set it for a certain amount of time and then change it at a later time. As an example, in 2019, baked-in ads took about 52% lead, but in 2002, and it's even more so, dynamically inserted ads have become the dominant delivery method at 84%. And, again, it's probably going to increase even more so because, the baked in ads, most of the larger advertisers, even smaller advertisers, have a problem with that.
Yeah, they expire. Right. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Right.
And I think it's something where, from a podcaster standpoint, your entire back catalog, all the episodes you have on a show are now suddenly available inventory, right? That you can serve ads on. So it's not just that, you're selling an ad once on your podcast, you're selling it, forever, which is really cool because, on the podcaster side, we know that people are going to go back, or people who find your show for the first time down the track are going to listen again to those older episodes, right? And your monthly download numbers isn't just from your latest episode. Sure, your latest episode may have the most downloads, but there may also be episodes, your first episode. Somebody may, it's so common to have your entire back catalog continue to be listened to. And most podcasts are evergreen, right? Their content is still great, unless you're a news show, right? Things are still current and things are still going to be interesting and valuable to the listener. So that also means that it's going to be available for the advertiser as well. So that's a really important aspect. And the technology's there, right? We've got it built in here at Podbean. It's called Pod Ads. It's incredible. And we also have the ads marketplace. And so it's something where, as a podcaster, if you sold an ad on maybe your third episode and you're on episode 100, you can't really resell that ad again. But if you're using DAI, dynamic ad insertion, you absolutely can. So it's really exciting. And
the other important thing, Norma Jean, too, is the fact that in the main push for DAI was the fact that you have better metrics.
yes,
When it comes to baked in, it's a little more difficult. Whereas with DAI, you can track it to actual listens. So someone who's actually downloaded and listened to that, particular ad.
absolutely. And I think on the advertiser side, that's really helpful because you're getting what you're paying for, right? And in the past, that lack of clarity has been kind of you don't know what you're going to get. Right? You may not be getting, right? You may not be getting the reach. Or in some cases, I think there's a very famous case with MailChimp and Serial, I believe. If I got that wrong, anybody send me an email, podcastingsmarter@podbean.com. But anyways, where they had purchased these baked in ads and they became so valuable, it just launched, the company into a whole other stratosphere. So it's something where I think, with baked in, you want to support the show. You think their audience is going to be good customers or a good demographic for your business, but you don't know, it could be wildly more successful, or, it could underdeliver. So with DAI, you're really seeing those statistics, and you're also seeing them with programmatic as well, which we're not talking that much about it today, but for everybody out there, programmatic is, served in near real time. So you can really target specifically the demographic, and the ads are served almost as the listener is listening. So it's really incredible technology. We have it here at Podbean, and I'll pop an episode here in the show notes, a link so that you can learn more about it, because it's really fascinating. And Kerry, I want to talk a little bit about the ads themselves, because, we've got announcer read ads, which is where, a third party, a third person comes in and says, hey, and here's the ad, right? Or we've also got host read ads. So can you tell us, host read is obviously where the host of the podcast is reading the ad. Maybe they're customizing it. They're personally recommending the product. So can you talk a little bit about the differences there, and how they've evolved, and kind of what is the current trend in the industry, and where we're seeing some important numbers?
Yeah. And initially, host read ads really took off because it's that authentic trust and credibility that a host provides to the listener. And therefore, folks were more apt to, buy the product or respond. And as the technology got better, the bigger advertisers were only going to get involved if they could scale it. And they couldn't scale it, let's say, on a national or global basis by going to each individual podcast that have them host read it. But so therefore, they said, let's run, not dissimilar to other media channels, let's run this one particular ad, and we want to run it through all the podcasts. And we did a test earlier where we had an advertiser we dropped it in as an announcer read ad, and they gave us the ad. And it was more like a radio ad, and it didn't really perform that well. And so our advice to the advertiser was, look, why don't you have us do it? You give us the talking points. We'll have one of our voiceover talents read it for you. And it's going to come across more as a podcast ad. And sure enough, it performed much better. And what the statistics are showing just over the last 2 years, that format of announcer read ads has jumped from 27% to 40%. And this is a little old, this research, but a year old. So that's gone up even further. So it's almost 50-50 at this point. And I can see that increasing even more so because the ability to, do it in scale and do it programmatically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I there's a couple of things there that I want to kind of unpack. The first is, I think everybody likes a host read ad, right? But if you want to advertise to a specific demographic across multiple podcasts, right? Or you have a specific message, programmatic is going to get you there in a way that host read isn't, right? And host read is incredible, right? It has its own purpose where it, directly connects the brand and the listener, and it uses the trust of the host to bring that message through. So I think they both have their time and place. It's really incredible. And I think what you said also about the ad format or the feeling of the ad being different, with a radio approach or a podcasting approach. Podcasters, I think in general, like we don't want something that's going to come across like, hey, folks, it's definitely more of like, hey, how's it going? It's more casual. It's more of a direct approach. Like, hey, I know you're listening to this, and there's it's less formal in a way.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say, advice to advertisers, typically a host read ad is a direct response ad, meaning that they want you to go to the website and order directly. They typically don't sell it in the stores. Whereas an announcer read ad is typically more brand awareness. So think of, car companies, the auto industry, or think of CPG, like, diapers or, hair care, that type of thing. So to your point, they're both very useful for, two very different selling approach or distribution channels that the brands use.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've also seen that podcast listeners are receptive to podcast advertising. So can we talk a little bit about that? Because I want to ask you, how do podcast listener statistics demonstrate the mainstream acceptance and popularity of podcasts, along with the listener's receptiveness to ads?
Yeah, it's incredible. 46% of monthly listeners don't find podcast advertising intrusive. This is almost, the opposite response to YouTube, where 43% of YouTube ads are very intrusive. The majority, 74% of monthly listeners, listen to podcasts weekly, and podcasters are reaching a younger, affluent, audience. So the statistics, I could give you a pretty long list of the reasons why you'd want advertising. And at the end of the day, it works. And the intent to purchase is extremely high after folks, not only the intent, but the actual, return on investment is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing about podcasting right now. We are in this exciting time. I think I talk about that a lot. I'm just excited because brands are seeing results. Podcasters are, finding ways to be supported and to create the work that they love. Listeners are getting great content. It's just kind of a really overall exciting time. And what's great about ads is that listeners understand, hey, this advertiser's allowing the podcast that I love to be made. It's supporting this podcast. I want to support that advertiser. Listeners are really understanding that and directly supporting those brands. It's incredible. It's a really important aspect as well. And podcast listeners also, like you said, they're not feeling like it's intrusive. They're feeling like, oh, it's part of the show, or I'm grateful that this advertiser is supporting the show that I love so I can continue to listen to it. So I think that's a really good aspect. as well. And last but not least, I want to ask you, how businesses can utilize podcast advertising to enhance brand awareness, lead generation, and targeting. Because, like you mentioned, programmatic's really great for brand awareness, and host read's really great for direct to consumer stuff you're not going to see in stores. So what are the different ways that businesses can utilize podcast advertising?
The beauty of using these statistics is that it definitely helps you identify your audience and, who's listening to certain genres, how long they're listening to them, and the type of products that they're buying. And you can, find all that by just listening to a podcast. But the higher number of people listening to a higher number of podcasts, since most listeners don't mind podcast ads, this presents, just a huge opportunity. And the large percentage of podcast listeners are educated, they're employed, and they can make their own purchasing decisions. So with that in mind, advertisers target, more ads to the audiences within their niche, and they have a higher potential conversion and or leads. Secondly, it will help you identify the types of ads to run, as I mentioned earlier, whether it be a brand awareness ad, which will typically be in the 20 to 30 second range. And the reason being is that, with a shorter ad, it allows you to buy more and provide you with more frequency. Whereas with a host read ad, more likely than not, it will be a mid-roll, it will be 60 seconds long, and it allows you to tell your story during those 60 seconds and, allow people, you can say it 3 times, the URL that you want to drive them to. So I think the type of ad, understanding what type of ads you should run is really important too. And, from a business perspective, it's important to understand, the length of ad that's going to be more impactful for you. With a shorter ad, more likely than not, it's going to be a lower CPM. And again, provides you with more frequency. Whereas with a mid-roll, you're going to probably pay a little more. But again, allows you to tell your story. And it also can help advertisers know which ad platform to use. And again, without getting too deep into it, you can do, depending on the size of your budget, if you have a smaller limited budget, you can jump into Podbean's ad marketplace and you can do it yourself, and you can choose by geography, you can choose by genre, you can choose by individual podcasts, and you can set the limit on the budget campaign that you have. And it allows you to play around with it more, and you test it as opposed to having someone else handing over the keys and let them test it. And we're more than happy to help you and advise you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So much there, Kerry. And, this episode really is inspired by our blog. So we've got that article here for you in the show notes. And of course, if you have any questions, please reach out to us at podcastingsmarter@podbean.com. Thanks so much, Kerry.
Thank you, Norma Jean.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Podcasting Smarter. If you have any podcasting questions or want to get in touch, send us an email at podcastingsmarter@podbean.com. Thanks so much and happy podcasting.